First up today, the day after Election Day. It was a late night for many Canadians as they watched election results roll in across the country. And we've been reporting all morning the Liberals are returning to power with a minority government. They are falling 4 seats short of achieving a majority win. And Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives, while conceding the election, they still managed to pick up more than 20 seats, and Poilievre himself lost his seat in the Ontario riding of Carleton. And NDP leader Jagmeet Singh also announced he will be stepping down after losing his own seat and the NDP losing official party status. So joining us now to chat about the election once again is Dalhousie political scientist Laurie Turnbull. Good morning, Laurie. I understand that you were up till like 3 in the morning doing political commentary, so we do appreciate you giving us a bit more of your time today. So you were saying, we were chatting as we were leading into this during the break, that the polls told a different story than the actual election results. Can you speak to that?
Okay, so the polls nationally, I think for a while now, were showing that the Liberals were enough ahead, right? Like, depending on what you looked at, it was maybe 5 points ahead. Sometimes it was like 8 points ahead. A couple of polls had them like 2 points ahead. And I think where that, where that started to kind of narrow at the end of the campaign, it was like people, I think, it was like Trump was less vocal. He was not tweeting as much. He had a tweet yesterday when the poll around just before the polls opened, but it was like that kind of focal point of Trump and the tariffs and the trade issues started to kind of fade a little bit in people's mind. And then you could see the polls starting to tighten. Now, I think where the polls, were telling us this story nationally, what happened on the ground was a bit different. I think even though the polls were showing a closeness nationally, the Liberals were still projected to be in majority territory because they were far ahead in Ontario and they were far ahead in Quebec. And what actually happened is they were far ahead in Quebec, but the Bloc Québécois still held their own. They're still in the 23-seat neighborhood. And in Ontario, the Conservatives did a heck of a lot better than the polls anticipated. And they did really well around that kind of GTA, that sort of area where there's a very high population. There's lots of seats in there. And the Conservatives did really well. They even managed to pick up a couple on the Atlantic Canada side, and the Liberals didn't pick up, to the level to match what the Conservatives picked up in a sense. So we have a pretty close result in the popular vote overall. We have a very close result in the popular vote in Ontario. Poilievre doesn't have a seat. They're going to have to figure that out. But this is a minority parliament, and it strikes me as a more precarious one than before, because the NDP don't have official party status. They're down to 7 seats. It's enough to get the Liberals over that majority line, which they missed just by 4 seats at this point. But this is tricky. This, I think, to me, there's a sense that there's a polarized result. There is, 80%, over 80% of Canadians voted either Liberal or Conservative. The Liberals are ahead, obviously, seat-wise, by more than 20 seats. But there is this sense of 2 camps, 2 big parties, and neither of them has enough on their own to be able to have a mandate.
Yeah, it is interesting. They're very close. And so what happens is, I guess, people learn to work together to move forward, in the same direction, or they are going to be, we're in for frustration, a lot of frustration. I don't know what the future holds.
Well, this is it, when the parties look at this result, what do they see, right? Like, what does this mean to them? For the NDP, they don't want to go to election anytime soon. They don't have party status, which means they're going to lose money, they're going to lose resources, they're going to be, they need a new leader because Jagmeet Singh, obviously resigned, lost his own seat. The Bloc, I think they don't want to go to election anytime soon either. They managed to get out of this with more seats than people anticipated, and so they don't want to risk that. However, what do the Conservatives see when they look at this? They see, we almost got it, right? And honestly, they got over 40% of the popular vote. Any other time, that would be a big majority for the Conservatives. But with this, because it really did become a 2-party race in a lot of ways, the Liberals got more of the popular vote, more seats than the Conservatives, but the Conservatives did really well. So how are they going to manage this? How long will this minority parliament last? I think, again, the smaller parties have a lot of interest in keeping this going for a while, but Mark Carney doesn't have a clear, mandate on his own. He asked for that strong mandate and it didn't come through. And so I'm not sure how kind of how solid this is going to be. I don't know how relationships are going to work in this context. And I mean, if even for example, something like pipelines, if Carney wants to build something so that the economy is stronger internally, is he going to get the Bloc or the NDP to support him on that? I don't think so. We might see some machinations where the Liberals and the Conservatives work together on some things, even though that seems totally crazy right now. It could possibly happen, but for how long? And if Polyev isn't in the House, what are they going to do? They're going to get someone to step aside so he can run in another riding, or are they going to leave him outside and say, you know what, we'll risk manage it because we only want this for a year anyway? Like, it's a whole bunch of questions.
Definitely lots and lots of questions. I've seen many movies, though, Lori, and sometimes if there are two people that are opposing opinions and then there's that third party that everybody doesn't like, and in this case it would be Donald Trump, sometimes they can work together and that things can work out. So I'll hold cautious optimism. Let's talk about the collapse of the NDP.
Yeah, so this was not unforeseen. I think the NDP went into this thing with like around 24 seats, and it was pretty clear they were going to have a hard time picking anything up in Atlantic Canada, which they didn't. Ontario, they held on to their seat in Quebec. But the real ground game for them was British Columbia, where over half of their caucus, just over half of their caucus members were from British Columbia, and they were reduced to 3 seats in British Columbia. So with that kind of result, they lose party status. Again, it was always going to be hard for them in this election because they weren't in contention to form government. They were a smaller party. So that ballot question of who's going to stand up to Donald Trump, the NDP didn't have a clear answer to that. And so now they're in a rebuild. Now it's going to be what is the party going to do? What do they stand for? Who's going to be the leader? Who wants to take on this project? And how to get that done in the context of, again, this sort of precarious parliament. I think the party will have a decision to make about, do they want to stick more on the progressive left side? Do they want to carve out a space, in a Liberal government that seems to be pulling a little more to the center now with Mark Carney, even a little bit center right, depending on what he wants to do? Does that leave an opportunity for the NDP on the left to start to rebuild?
Well, Lori, we really appreciate your thoughts this morning. Only time will tell how things pan out. We do appreciate your thoughts, and I hope you do get some sleep eventually.